It was March 18, 1314, and Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, was bound to a wooden stake on a small island in the Seine River in Paris. The stake stood 12 feet high, and Jacques was secured with iron chains at his chest, waist, and ankles. The executioners had deliberately chosen green wood instead of dry wood for the fire, which would burn at a lower temperature and produce more smoke. The fire was lit at approximately 2 p.m., and the flames reached Jacques' feet within minutes. Green wood burns at approximately 800 degrees Fahrenheit, rather than the 1,400 degrees of dry wood, which meant the burning process would take significantly longer. The lower temperature kept Jacques conscious for an extended period. The smoke from the green wood made breathing difficult, but the flames were not hot enough to cause immediate death. After 2 hours, Jacques finally died from the combined effects of burns and smoke inhalation. It was October 25, 1415, and French knight Charles d'Albret led approximately 12,000 armored men across a muddy field near Agincourt. Each knight wore full plate armor weighing between 50 and 60 pounds. 3 days of heavy rain had turned the plowed farmland into thick mud measuring 6 to 8 inches deep. The battlefield was narrow, approximately 1,000 yards wide, positioned between 2 forests. As the French knights advanced, the mud slowed their movement to less than half their normal speed. English archers positioned at both flanks released volleys of arrows, and knights began falling face first into the mud. The weight of their armor made standing back up nearly impossible without assistance. Charles fell approximately 400 yards from the English lines. He went down face first with his visor closed, and the impact drove his helmet deep into the mud. Other knights behind him tripped over his body and fell on top of him. Within minutes, there were 10 to 15 bodies piled in some areas of the battlefield. The pressure from the weight above pushed Charles's face deeper into the mud, and the closed visor prevented him from turning his head. Mud entered through the visor's breathing holes as he tried to inhale. His arms were pinned by the bodies above him and the suction of the mud on his armored limbs. He drowned while fully conscious, surrounded by the sounds of battle continuing above him. The same fate occurred across the battlefield. Hundreds of French knights fell and were unable to rise because of the mud and the weight of other knights falling on top of them. An estimated 1,500 French knights and nobles died at Agincourt. A significant portion had no visible wounds from weapons. They had drowned in the mud under the weight of their own armor and their companions. It was January 28, 1628, and the Swedish warship Vasa departed from Stockholm harbor with approximately 150 crew members and guests aboard. The ship measured 296 feet in length, with a beam of 38 feet, and carried 64 bronze cannons positioned on 2 gun decks. The upper gun deck was positioned only 4 feet above the waterline. The captain had orders to proceed, despite concerns raised during stability tests conducted at the dock. At approximately 4 p.m., the Vasa traveled 1,800 yards from shore, when a gust of wind measuring approximately 8 knots hit the sails from the port side. The ship immediately heeled over to one side, and water began pouring through the open gun ports on the lower gun deck. The gun ports measured 2 feet by 3 feet each. The Vasa was top-heavy because the cannons and decorative elements added an extra 20 tons to the upper structure. As water flooded the lower deck, the center of gravity shifted further and the ship rolled past 45 degrees within 2 minutes. Crew members and passengers on the lower decks tried to reach the hatches, but the angle made climbing impossible, and water was already waist-deep. The flooding occurred at a rate of several tons per second through the open gun ports. People on the upper deck jumped into the water, but many were pulled under by the suction created as the ship went down. The Vasa sank in water that was 105 feet deep. and the entire process from the first gust of wind to the ship settling on the bottom took less than 20 minutes. Rescue boats arrived quickly and pulled approximately 30 people from the water. However, between 30 and 50 people went down with the ship. Many drowned in the flooding gun decks, trapped by the extreme angle and the rushing water, pressing them against walls and equipment. Others were trapped in their cabins as the ship rolled. When the Vasa was raised in 1961, several crew members were found near the hatches where they had tried to escape. It was September 13, 1860, and 23 workers operated steam-powered machinery at the Pemberton Mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts. The mill was a 5-story brick structure measuring 280 feet long and 84 feet wide. The building was supported by cast iron columns that were hollow tubes, measuring 10 inches in diameter with walls only half an inch thick. Each floor held machinery weighing approximately 50 tons, and the constant vibrations created stress on the support columns. Most workers were women and children working 12-hour shifts. At approximately 4:45 p.m., one column on the first floor buckled. The failure of the first column redistributed weight to adjacent columns, and within seconds, multiple columns on the first floor gave way simultaneously. The entire 5-story structure collapsed straight down in less than 30 seconds. Each floor pancaked onto the one below. Workers on the upper floors had no warning. Heavy machinery weighing several hundred pounds crashed through each level, crushing anyone in its path. The looms and spinning machines became projectiles as they fell through the collapsing floors. The collapse created a debris pile measuring approximately 30 feet high at its peak. Workers were buried under broken wooden beams, twisted machinery, and brick rubble. Some victims were driven 15 to 20 feet below the surface by the force of the collapse. Rescuers arrived within minutes and began digging through the wreckage by hand. They heard screams coming from multiple locations within the pile, but extracting victims was difficult because machinery pinned them down. After several hours of rescue work, a fire broke out. The machinery's oil reservoirs had ruptured during the collapse, and lanterns used by rescuers ignited the spilled oil. The fire spread rapidly through the wooden debris. Rescuers tried to reach trapped workers before the flames did, but the fire moved faster than they could dig. Workers who had survived the collapse were now trapped with fire spreading toward them. Many were pinned by machinery and could not free themselves. The fire burned for several hours, and workers who had been calling for help gradually fell silent. A total of 145 workers died. Approximately 90 were killed in the initial collapse, and an estimated 55 more survived the collapse but died in the fire. It was May 6, 1937, and the German airship Hindenburg approached Naval Air Station Lakehurst in New Jersey with 97 people aboard. The airship measured 804 feet in length and had a diameter of 135 feet. It was filled with approximately 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen gas contained in 16 separate cells. At 7:21 p.m., the ground crew grabbed the landing ropes that had been dropped from the bow. The Hindenburg was at an altitude of approximately 200 feet. Weather conditions included light rain and electrical activity in the atmosphere. At 7:25 p.m., witnesses on the ground noticed a small flame near the tail section at the top of the ship near gas cell number 4. Within 2 seconds, the flame grew into a massive fire. The hydrogen gas ignited in a chain reaction as each cell ruptured. The fire spread forward at approximately 30 feet per second, and the entire 804-foot airship was engulfed in flames in less than 34 seconds. The heat from burning hydrogen reached temperatures of approximately 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The aluminum framework began to melt and collapse. Passengers and crew had almost no time to react. The tail section dropped first as the gas cells there burned out, and the ship's angle became steeper. People inside tried to reach exits, but the ship was tilting at severe angles. Some jumped from windows before the ship hit the ground, falling from heights up to 150 feet. Others waited until the ship was closer to the ground, but by then flames had spread throughout the interior. When the framework hit the ground, it collapsed into a burning heap. The diesel fuel stored in the engine gondolas ignited. People trapped inside were surrounded by flames. Ground crew members and naval personnel rushed into the fire to pull out survivors. The heat was so intense that aluminum framework melted into pools in some areas. Of the 97 people aboard, 35 died, including 13 passengers and 22 crew members. One member of the ground crew also died, bringing the total to 36. Many victims died from burns rather than impact. It was August 21, 1945, and physicist Harry Daghlian worked alone at the Omega Site Laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico. He was conducting experiments with a plutonium core measuring 3.5 inches in diameter and weighing 14 pounds. The experiment involved stacking tungsten carbide bricks around the core to reflect neutrons and bring it close to criticality. Safety protocols specified this work should never be done alone, but Harry had decided to work after hours. He carefully placed bricks one by one, monitoring neutron counts. Each brick brought the assembly closer to critical mass. At approximately 9:55 p.m., Harry held the final brick directly over the center of the assembly. His instruments showed the neutron count rising rapidly. He realized the assembly was already too close to critical mass, but before he could stop, the brick settled into position. The plutonium core went supercritical immediately, and a bright blue flash filled the room. The flash was ionized air molecules as intense radiation flooded the space. Harry felt a tingling sensation in his hand and saw blue glow surrounding the assembly. He knocked the brick away with his hand, stopping the reaction. The entire incident lasted less than 2 seconds. However, there was a problem that would determine his fate. During those 2 seconds, the core released an intense burst of neutron and gamma radiation. Harry's right hand, positioned directly over the core, received approximately 20,000 rad. His body overall absorbed approximately 510 rad, more than 5 times the lethal dose. A dose of 400 rad is typically fatal. The radiation began destroying his cells at the molecular level. The instant the core went critical, Harry immediately reported the incident and was taken to the hospital. Within hours, his right hand began to swell and turn red. Over the next few days, his hand developed severe radiation burns that penetrated deep into tissue. The cells in his hand died faster than his body could replace them, and the tissue began to necrotize. The radiation damaged his bone marrow, which meant his body could no longer produce blood cells at normal rates. His immune system started to fail as his white blood cell count dropped to nearly 0. After 9 days, the tissue in Harry's hand had turned black and was separating from underlying structures. He experienced severe nausea, vomiting, and internal bleeding as his digestive tract lining broke down. His body was falling apart at the cellular level. Harry remained conscious and lucid for most of this time, fully aware of what was happening. On August 30th, 1945, 25 days after the accident, Harry died from acute radiation syndrome. He was 24 years old. It was July 17, 1996, and Trans World Airlines Flight 800 climbed to cruising altitude after departing John F. Kennedy International Airport with 230 people aboard. The aircraft was a Boeing 747-100 bound for Paris. The flight departed at 8:19 p.m. The crew consisted of 18 members, and there were 212 passengers. At 8:31 p.m., when the aircraft reached 1,360 feet, approximately 8 miles south of East Moriches, New York, the center wing fuel tank exploded. The tank was located between the wings in the central fuselage and had a capacity of 13,000 gallons. At the time of explosion, it contained approximately 50 gallons of fuel, but the remaining space was filled with fuel vapor mixed with air. The vapor had been heated by the air conditioning system running beneath the tank, raising the temperature to approximately 127 degrees Fahrenheit. The explosion was instantaneous. The force measured several tons of TNT equivalent and destroyed the structural integrity of the aircraft's center section. The nose section, including the cockpit and first-class cabin, separated immediately. The pilots and 17 passengers in the forward cabin were killed instantly as their section broke off at nearly 14,000 feet. The nose section fell toward the Atlantic Ocean below. Meanwhile, the remaining fuselage continued upward for several seconds because of forward momentum and engine thrust. The aircraft climbed to approximately 15,500 feet before aerodynamic forces caused it to pitch nose down. During this climb, passengers in the rear section were exposed to rapid decompression and extreme forces. Cabin pressure dropped to near vacuum in less than 2 seconds. The temperature dropped to approximately -70 degrees Fahrenheit almost instantly. As the main fuselage began falling, it broke into several pieces. The wing section separated, and the fuselage fractured into multiple segments. Passengers strapped in their seats fell from altitudes exceeding 13,000 feet. The fall lasted approximately 42 seconds. During descent, passengers who remained conscious experienced hypoxia, extreme cold, and free fall. Some were ejected as the aircraft broke apart. Others remained strapped in their seats as sections tumbled downward. The wreckage impacted the Atlantic Ocean at speeds exceeding 300 miles per hour. The force of impact was equivalent to hitting concrete. The ocean was approximately 120 feet deep at the impact site, and debris scattered across an area measuring 4 miles by 3 miles. Coast Guard vessels and rescue helicopters arrived within 20 minutes, but there were no survivors. All 230 people aboard died. Recovery operations lasted for months, and investigators recovered approximately 95% of the wreckage from the ocean floor. It was February 1st, 2003, and Space Shuttle Columbia began re-entry into Earth's atmosphere after completing a 16-day mission. The shuttle carried 7 crew members, Commander Rick Husband, pilot William McCool, and mission specialists David Brown, Kalpana Chawla, Laurel Clark, Michael Anderson, and Israeli astronaut Ilan Ramon. During launch on January 16th, a piece of foam insulation measuring approximately 24 inches by 20 inches broke off from the external fuel tank and struck the leading edge of the left wing at approximately 545 miles per hour. The foam strike created a hole measuring between 6 and 10 inches in the reinforced carbon-carbon panel. This material was designed to withstand temperatures up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, but the hole compromised its integrity. Mission Control reviewed footage but concluded it posed no safety threat. Re-entry began at 400,000 feet, traveling at 17,500 miles per hour. At 8:53 a.m., as Columbia descended through 243,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean, superheated plasma at temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees began entering the breach in the left wing. The plasma was created by atmospheric friction and would normally be deflected by the heat shield. Instead, it flowed into the wing's interior, melting aluminum components and destroying systems. The crew had no indication anything was wrong. Control systems responded normally, and they were in communication with Mission Control. However, sensors in the left wing began failing one by one as heat destroyed them. At 8:54 a.m., 4 temperature sensors in the left wheel well stopped transmitting. By 8:58 a.m., additional sensors had failed, and tire pressure readings from the left landing gear showed unusual fluctuations before going offline. The heat spread through the wing structure, melting the aluminum frame from inside. At 8:59 a.m., when Columbia was over California at 231,000 feet, Mission Control noticed the sensor failures and attempted to alert the crew. Commander Husband began to respond, but his transmission was cut off. At that moment, superheated air had burned through enough of the wing's internal structure that aerodynamic forces began tearing the shuttle apart. The left wing separated first, causing the shuttle to yaw violently. The forces exceeded design limits, and the vehicle broke into multiple pieces within seconds. The crew cabin separated as a relatively intact unit, but was subjected to extreme aerodynamic forces and deceleration exceeding 20 Gs. The crew members were strapped in their seats as the cabin tumbled through the sky at hypersonic speeds. The cabin broke apart during descent, and debris scattered across Texas and Louisiana along a path measuring approximately 250 miles. The crew died from trauma from the breakup, extreme deceleration, depressurization, and hypoxia. All 7 astronauts were killed. It was June 18, 2023, and 5 people were aboard the submersible Titan as it descended toward the wreck of the Titanic at a depth of 12,500 feet in the North Atlantic. The submersible was operated by Ocean Gate Expeditions and carried CEO Stockton Rush, British businessman Hamish Harding, French Titanic expert Paul-Henri Nargeolet, Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood, and his son Suleiman, age 19. The Titan measured 22 feet long with an internal diameter of 66 inches and was constructed from carbon fiber composite with titanium end caps. Descent began at 8 a.m., and communication with the surface vessel was maintained through text messaging. At approximately 9:45 a.m., when the Titan reached approximately 9,800 feet, the surface team received the last message. After that point, all communication ceased. The surface crew waited, but no further messages came. At 10:40 a.m., when the submersible failed to surface at its scheduled time, the Coast Guard was notified. However, there was a problem. At the moment communication stopped, the carbon fiber hull had failed catastrophically under extreme pressure. At 9,800 feet, water pressure measured approximately 4,400 pounds per square inch. The hull had developed microscopic stress fractures from previous dives, and on this descent, the damage reached a critical point. When the hull failed, the implosion occurred in less than 40 milliseconds. The implosion created a pressure wave that traveled faster than the speed of sound in water. The 5 occupants were killed instantly as the pressure hull collapsed inward. The water pressure crushed the interior space from its normal 66-inch diameter to almost nothing in a fraction of a second. The occupants had no awareness because the speed of implosion was faster than the human nervous system's ability to process signals. The temperature inside briefly spiked to thousands of degrees as air compressed. Debris from the Titan was scattered across the ocean floor within 1,500 feet of the Titanic wreck. Search operations continued for 4 days before a remote-operated vehicle located the tail cone on the seafloor. Additional pieces were found nearby, including sections of the pressure hull and the titanium end caps. All 5 occupants were confirmed